Had a great morning this morning. It was a great kickoff by Marion and the military panel, and we're about to switch gears, and we're going to head into a subject that I think all of us have been talking about and are very interested to hear our next speaker and then the panel that'll follow that. And so our next speaker is Richard A. Clarke, who is Chairman and CEO of Good Harbor Security Risk Management. He's an internationally recognized expert on cybersecurity, homeland security, national security, and counterterrorism. He teaches at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and is a consultant for ABC News. He's authored a book called Cyber War: The Next Threat to National Security and What to Do About It. Mr. Clarke has advised 3 of former presidents as a White House senior advisor, including special advisor to the President for Cybersecurity, National Coordinator for Security and Counterterrorism. Prior to his White House years, he served as 19 years in the Pentagon, in the intelligence community, and the State Department. During the Reagan administration, he was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Intelligence, and in the subsequent Bush administration, he was Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. He is the chairman, as I said, of the Good Harbor, and he advises clients on cybersecurity risks. So with that, would you please join me in giving a warm welcome to Richard Clarke. And here's a token from the speaker. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. You omitted a few things, like my service in the Lincoln and Grant administrations, but I think probably we can spare the audience that. Thank you so much for inviting me. It is a great issue that you're dealing with here, which is the conjunction of cybersecurity and aviation. And as someone who spends 3/4 of his time in an airplane, I think an issue that I care personally about. But we all do as a nation, because the aviation industry is vital, key, the sine qua non to the American economy. So it is essential that we get right this conjunction between cybersecurity and aviation. So with that in mind, I want to do 3 things today. One, I want to talk in general about the nature of cyberspace and the threats that we're seeing in it. Then I want to talk about what the experience of some other sectors have been in thinking about how a sector of industry deals with cybersecurity threats. And then I want to suggest, humbly, as someone outside the industry, some things that you as an association and as an industry might want to do to address this issue of cybersecurity as it affects your industry. Let me start with the first question. What is the nature of cyberspace today? Every time you pick up the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, you see a story about somebody being hacked. The New York Times got particularly focused on cybersecurity when it was them that was being hacked. And the news today, again, was that the Chinese army team that hacked the New York Times, which disappeared after it was revealed publicly, the news this morning in the newspaper was that that Chinese army team is back, active, and now using more advanced techniques and threats. But with all of this stuff in the news, it's sometimes difficult to step back and put it all in perspective and figure out how important is it. In all the chatter and all the news stories about banks being hacked and credit cards being stolen, and what is the message that we should be listening to? What's the takeaway? And for once in the last year, the leadership of the American government has been, I think, crystal clear about the nature of the problem. But I'm not sure their message has penetrated through all of the chatter. So let me just go over 3 things that senior leaders of the U.S. government have been sending out as a public message, because it's key that you get that message. They clearly want you to get the message. Let me start with what the Secretary of Defense at the time, Leon Panetta, said about 9 months ago. Speaking in New York, a few miles from the World Trade Center site at the USS Intrepid Museum, it's a great aviation museum, Secretary of Defense said, when it comes to cyberspace, when it comes to cybersecurity, quote, we are at a pre-9/11 moment. Now, when Leon Panetta says something like that, a man who has seen it all, a man who is very well grounded, when he sends a message to American business executives that we are at a pre-9/11 moment, we have to take that seriously. He clearly takes it seriously. When the defense budget was being slashed, he was investing in increasing expenditures on cybersecurity. Pre-9/11 moment. 9/11, after all, was an attack on the aviation industry. It was much more, but it was an attack on the aviation industry that it took a long time for the industry to recover from. When someone says there's another 9/11 coming, he's not necessarily saying it's aimed at the aviation industry. But I think we have to assume that if another 9/11 happened in cyberspace, the aviation industry might be part of the target set. So we have to take it seriously. The Attorney General, Eric Holder, followed up another message aimed at American corporate leadership. Eric Holder said, I want you to know there are only two kinds of American companies: those that have been hacked and know it, and those that have been hacked and don't know it. Now, that usually gets a little ripple of laughter. But it's an important message, because you have the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, the guy for whom the FBI works, sending you a message that your company has been hacked. It is hacked. Every major American company and small and medium-sized enterprises have already been penetrated. They've been penetrated by advanced persistent threats that most software, cybersecurity software, cannot detect. And it takes an extremely good team of forensics people going in and looking at a company's network and looking at it for a month or more to find that penetration. That's how good they are these days. But the message the Attorney General was giving was that your company has been hacked. How have you adjusted to that news? How has your company changed its policies since you got that news that you are now hacked? And the third message in this drumbeat came from the President himself in the State of the Union address. In talking about cybersecurity, he said that foreign entities are attacking the financial services sector, the electric power grid, and the air traffic control system. The President said in the State of the Union address that foreign entities were trying to hack into the control systems for financial services, the power grid, and the air traffic control system. I expected headlines the next day in the paper: President declassifies secret information that the air traffic control system was being targeted by foreign entities. I didn't see that story. But it is true, and he declassified that fact, and we have to take into account now that we've been warned. You as an industry, have been warned. Your companies have been hacked. Foreign entities are doing it. They're going after the aviation industry. And it's not just about stealing intellectual property. It's not just the Chinese stealing your engineering designs, although they are doing that prodigiously. It's about disruption, it's about damage, and it's about destruction. No longer is cyber war a theoretical possibility. we've seen it in operation. There was a choice a couple of years ago on whether or not the United States or Israel should fly aircraft into Iran and blow up their nuclear enrichment facility at Natanz. And the decision was made not to do that, not to drop bombs, not to launch missiles against that facility. Instead of using bombs and bullets, Natanz was attacked by bits and bytes. A cyber war attack was launched on that nuclear facility that destroyed 800 nuclear centrifuges. A facility that was not connected to the internet, a facility that was air-gapped, was nonetheless the subject of a cyber attack that successfully destroyed 800 centrifuges and retarded the Iranian nuclear program by 6 to 9 months. Some people say that was your tax dollars at work. But if it was, the Iranians responded. The Iranians did two things to send a message. A, they attacked the Saudi oil company, Aramco. They got into the network there, and they wiped clean everything on 30,000 computers. Blue screen of death on every endpoint, 30,000 endpoints wiped clean. The so-called Shamoon virus. And then the Iranians started attacking US banks and using digital denial of service attacks to knock off the online banking functions at Wells Fargo and JP Morgan and Citibank and Bank of America and SunTrust and Capital One. Now, they all came back, but Iran sent us a message. Iran sent us a message that they too have cyber capabilities, and they don't like it when we attack them in cyberspace, because they can attack back. And then later this year, we saw the North Koreans with a cyber attack that disrupted the second largest bank in South Korea and took 2 South Korean television networks off the air. Now, if Iran has cyber warfare capability, and North Korea has cyber warfare capability, you have to assume that most nations do. North Korea barely has an internet connection. In fact, when the United States announced that it was creating U.S. Cyber Command, commanded by a 4-star general with Air Force and Navy and Army components, we were the first country to announce that we had a cyber warfare unit. Since then, 26 countries have announced they have cyber warfare units. And there are many more countries beyond that who actually do. And it's not just armies that have this capability. More and more we're seeing that the most sophisticated attack tools are in the hands of non-state actors. So this capability to fight cyber war, to cause damage, disruption, destruction, is spreading. It's spreading among nations, and it's spreading from nations down to non-state actors. The threat is also spreading into different fields, fields that never thought they would be subject to cyber attack, but fields where, nonetheless, hardware and software have become key and essential. Maybe you saw the hacker convention in Las Vegas last week, DEF CON. One of the most popular lectures at DEF CON this year was demonstrating how to hack into an automobile, how to hack a car, how a car driving down the freeway can be remotely attacked, have its brakes turned on remotely, have the door locks lock remotely, have the steering shift, have the airbag go off. That's not theoretical. Scientists and engineers at the University of California at San Diego and at Washington University in St. Louis have demonstrated that they can do that without anything special into most modern cars. Why? Because most modern cars today are software on wheels. The average car that most of you are driving has 26 computers in it. And it can be accessed either remotely through a satellite connection, or it can be accessed by a valet parking attendant. And yet the automobile industry, for all of its reliance on software and all of its reliance on computers to run cars, had never thought that someday there might be somebody out there who would have an evil thought, who would be a wrongdoer, who would be an evildoer, who would want to use their software and their computers and their networks to do harm. Well, now they're beginning to think about it. Now they're realizing that all those 26 computers are running on one bus, on one network, that there's no authentication, that there's no encryption. And this has been the story of industry after industry. It's the story of the internet. The internet was created without any thought that someday someone might use it for malevolent purposes. The other discussion at Black Hat was about the medical industry and people demonstrating that through cyber attacks, they can attack medical devices on which life depends. Not just medical devices in hospitals, but medical devices inside people. There was a demonstration that pacemakers could be attacked by cyber attacks at 30 feet. Industry after industry learning that you need to think about cybersecurity before you engineer, before you design, and before you deploy. So that's the state of cyberspace today. Hundreds of billions of dollars lost every year to cybercrime, cyber espionage, stealing everything that's available to be stolen, and malevolent actors looking for ways to do damage, destruction, and disruption. And those actors not just being states, but also being non-state actors. So that's the first question. What's the state of cyberspace? And the answer is not very good. The second question is, what has been the experience of these other sectors? And how have they been able to address these issues? Let me talk about two in particular. First, two that President Obama mentioned in the State of the Union address: the electric power grid and the financial services sector. Let's start with the electric power grid. When I was in the White House and cybersecurity advisor, I talked to electric power companies and I asked them what they were doing for cybersecurity. And they said they didn't need to do anything for cybersecurity because the controls to the electric power grid were not on the internet. Well, they actually believed that, I think, some of them. So we asked them if it would be okay if NSA had some red teams go out and see if they could get from the internet into the control systems for their electric power grids. Would it surprise you to know that every attempt succeeded? That even though the electric power grid didn't think it was connected to the internet, it was. And in one very dramatic display at Idaho National Laboratory, they set up a simulated electric grid with a real live generator and attacked it from the internet into the control systems of the network, and from there to the SCADA system, the digital control system for the generator, and gave the generator the kinds of commands that would cause it to fly apart. If you don't believe this, you can watch it on YouTube. Just Google Aurora Experiment, Idaho National Labs, and you'll see the experiment up to the point where they stopped the generator because it was about to fly apart. And now, as the president has admitted, foreign entities are hacking their way into the control system for the electric power grid. They're not doing that to collect intelligence. They're not doing that to collect intellectual property. They're doing that so that they will be in position, if they ever need to shut the United States down, to shut down power grids by giving commands that cause high-tension wires to be overloaded, giving commands that cause generators to spin at the wrong rate, and turning off networks. So the electric power industry, for a very long time, said that wasn't possible. And then they heard from the government, and they heard from the Congress, and they heard from their regulator, the Federal Electric Regulatory Commission, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that it was possible, and if they didn't do something about it, the government would. And so the trade association, NERC, got together and took it seriously and came up with standards and spent money and have an ongoing program, not just to increase the security of existing systems, but to be sure that there's research and development going on so that future systems can be resistant to cyber attack. But the truth is, it will take a generation before that technology is developed and that technology is implemented. And so for at least the next 10 or 20 years, our electric power grid, like most modern societies' electric power grids, will be subject to cyber attack. Now contrast that with the financial services industry. The financial services industry realized long ago that they wanted you banking online. Why? Because if you go in to a teller in a brick and mortar facility and you do a transaction, it typically costs the bank $7 or $8 to do that transaction. To pay for the teller, to pay for the brick and mortar, to pay for the bank guard. $7 or $8 for you to do a transaction. If they can get you to do it in an ATM machine in the supermarket, the cost of that transaction drops to 25 cents. If they can get you to do it online, it costs them a penny or less. So the banking industry wants you to bank online. And they moved very rapidly in that direction without thinking a lot about security. The result is that today, the banking industry loses hundreds of billions of dollars a year globally to cyber attack. Now they're paying it. Right now they're paying it. So that if your account is hacked, somebody takes money out of your account or your credit card account, the banks will make you whole because it's still in their financial interest to have you banking online. But the pain point is getting higher all the time. The day may well come when they will no longer be able to make you whole from those cyber attacks. So what did they do? The Financial Services Roundtable got together, that's the CEOs of all the big financial services companies, and they created a sub-organization of the Financial Services Roundtable called BITS. And BITS is a professional organization owned by the FS Roundtable that is trying to develop standards, best practices, share information, and look at research and development into new technologies. New technologies that will make authentication and identification and security easier. So those two industries have gone through some pain, but more or less come to the same conclusion. That if they're going to keep the federal government regulators at bay, and if they're going to have trust from their customers and consumers, they need to develop their own approach as an industry to cybersecurity. I think that's where you are today. The guidelines that the association have developed, which will be discussed in the panel following lunch, move your industry in the direction of realizing that you've got a problem. Not just as individual companies, because as individual companies, most of you have been doing the right thing. But you have a problem as an industry vertical that is diverse, that depends upon all of the pieces working. So let me, humbly, since I'm not part of the aviation industry, Nonetheless, let me suggest a list of 10 things that you may want to bear in mind going forward as an industry thinking about cybersecurity. So, my top 10 list. Number one, don't be in denial. Don't fight the problem. Don't think that the problem isn't significant. Don't think you've got it licked. Don't think that because you've had an auditing firm come in and tell you you're okay, you're okay. Every firm that's been hacked had an auditing firm tell them they were okay. Don't think that because you've been certified or you've had a red team come and try to get into your network that you're okay. You're not okay. So number one, don't be in denial. Number two, don't underestimate the extent of the problem. You think it may be just now, stealing a little intellectual property, but the Chinese can't figure out what to do with it anyway. The problem could be very significant. All of these events, these major events that have occurred to other industries, were first-time events. 9/11 was a first-time event. Don't think that just because some worst-case scenario has not happened yet, that it cannot happen. Don't underestimate the problem. Number three, don't be hostile to the government. Yes, you want to prevent government regulation, but work with the government. The sectors that have done the best in avoiding government regulation are not the sectors that have put up a wall and told the government to go to hell. The sectors that have been the best at avoiding government regulation are those that partnered with the government, so the government could see what was going on and, yes, be helpful. Sometimes parts of the government can be helpful. I know. Number four, don't make this an issue buried in the bureaucracy. Make it a CEO issue. Make it a board issue. This is an existential issue. If the worst-case scenarios happen, it's an existential issue. Don't think that this is something for the CIO to do. This is a whole-of-company problem. And it deserves CEO attention. It deserves board attention. Companies are increasingly organizing their governance models for cybersecurity in a different way that recognizes that. Rockwell, for example, has taken this issue and put it under the in-house general counsel. So has American Express. So has Time Warner Cable. Put it under the in-house general counsel reporting to the CEO. Because it's not just a CIO issue anymore. Number five, organize. Organize, create an organization within the association or separately that can do all of the things necessary, that can do all of the information sharing through an ISAC function, but also can sponsor research and development, can identify new problems and share that information. Organize as an industry, share information, look at R&D. Organize. And number six, think holistically. Don't just think about your part. Don't just think about the airport. Don't just think about the engine. Don't just think about the reservation system. Think about the seams. Think about the mutual dependencies. Think about the supply chain. Think about it as a target. Think about the industry holistically and not just in silos. Number seven, don't attempt to defend the entire network. Most of the rest of the industries, financial services, others, have long ago put behind them this notion of doing cybersecurity as defending the periphery, defending the perimeter, putting a moat around the issue. It's too late. The enemy's already in your network. So an approach that says, I'm going to defend the whole network, is not going to work. Besides, it's too difficult. Instead, try to do number 8. Discover what your real crown jewels are. as an industry. I say discover what your real crown jewels are because I don't think you know. Most industries don't know. Most companies don't know what their crown jewels really are. You think you know, and you may have some of them right, but you need to go through a discovery process to really find those dependencies and what really is important to defend. And number 9, you also need to go through a discovery process to figure out what are the worst case scenarios. The 9/11 Commission said that the government had failed prior to 9/11. It had a failure of imagination. And that's what the 9/11 Commission said. A failure of imagination because they hadn't tried to envision all of the worst case scenarios and then defend against them. People are reluctant to do that. But as an industry, you need to get together and say, what could go wrong? Now, I know you don't want people talking about crazy scenarios in public, and you don't want to have the fear factor enter in. But in the quiet of closed rooms, get together and ask yourself, what is the worst case scenario? What would a cyber 9/11 look like against this industry? How could it be done? The people in this room know how it could be done. You need to talk to each other about it. You need to discover the worst case scenarios. And number 10, then the most important thing you can do as an industry is have a cybersecurity strategy as an industry. Have a strategy. Otherwise, you're just flailing. Have a strategy and have goals and have a timeline so that you can judge every year how you're doing in achieving that strategy. Because otherwise, you'll just be making activity. You can do this stuff forever. You can spend all your money on it, but you won't be achieving anything. So have a strategy and get the CEOs to buy into it. Get the CEOs to approve it. Get them to understand what it means for their company and what it means for you as an industry. But don't think when you develop that timeline that there is an end to it, that there is an end point, because there isn't. One thing we know so far is that the technology that we have built, the internet technology that we have built, is going to be with us for the next 20 years. And it is inherently vulnerable, it is inherently unstable. And so for as long as you're in this business, this problem is going to be there and it's going to be constantly changing. If you do those 10 things, and you do them well as an industry, I think you can achieve a couple of things. You can keep government regulators at bay, but most importantly, you can keep this whole system, from the airports to the airlines to the manufacturers, safe and secure, so that when 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we look back and we say, well, was Leon Panetta right when he said there would be a cyber 9/11? We can all say happily, it never happened. Thank you very much. I think we've got some time, and if there are any comments, responses, questions, I'll be glad to take them. I think there are some microphones floating around. Some microphone in the back. The first person to ask a question gets a prize. Sir.
Well, the obvious question is, if they can remotely shut down cars, they can probably remotely shut down aircraft. We're wrestling now with the problem of unmanned aircraft in commercial airspace. There's things I've read about the Beast of Kandahar being jammed and brought down. Can you talk about some specifics for our industry?
Well, I don't buy the premise. I don't buy the premise that because you can remotely control a car, that you can remotely control an aircraft that doesn't want to be remotely controlled. No, I don't think so. don't think today it is possible to hack your way from a college dormitory into the control system for an airplane in the air. I don't think that's possible. But there may be other things in the aviation industry that can be. You asked specifically about the Beast of Kandahar, which, and in the story that it may have been hacked, a U.S. drone over Iran may have been hacked. CIA and the Pentagon said when that drone landed in Iran that the Iranians were lying and that it had not been hacked. Iranians lying, I buy. The fact that the drone wasn't hacked, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. We have seen in the past U.S. Predator flights where encryption wasn't operating and where third parties, individual citizens in various countries, were able to tap into the video stream from predators. There are ways, I think most of you know, of dealing with GPS signals. And while it's harder to do things to the military GPS signal, it's not impossible. So I think there is concern as we go increasingly reliant on UAVs. And you know, you've heard the predictions that we were building our last fighter plane, our last manned fighter plane. I hope that's not true. But clearly, the industry is heading more and more in the direction of UAVs, and they are more susceptible to hacking than other aircraft. So I think it is an area of concern.
All using the same operating system, which allows them, shall we say, a front door and a back door to get in and know what they're looking for when they get there?
Well, you know, there is a problem of homogeneity in software. But I think the real problem is one that, again, it's too late to fix. And that is, if we could go back to the day when the Pentagon decided to move from a government system to a COTS system, I think we might have second thoughts now that we've experienced what can be done to a COTS system. But that's too late. We're there. Pentagon, military systems, other systems running critical infrastructure and electric power or wherever are all commercial off-the-shelf software. If you go back in the electric power industry, you go back 20, 25 years, you'll find that many electric power companies had their own software, their own SCADA systems that they had developed. And no one else understood them, no one could hack into them successfully. Now there are about 4 companies in the world that make SCADA systems for electric power. And you'll find the same software running in Los Angeles on the SCADA system that runs in Beijing on the SCADA system. Again, it's too late to go back. But the fact that we are all using software that is globally available is a problem. I talked about DEF CON this year. DEF CON last year, someone took the Siemens SCADA system, and Siemens is, if not the most widely deployed SCADA system on electric power grids around the world, it's one of the 2 or 3 most widely deployed. And at DEF CON, this fellow demonstrated that all of the Siemens 7 SCADA systems around the world had been hard-coded with a backdoor by the system's developer so they could get back in, and all of them, all around the world, had the same password for that backdoor. And this very helpful fellow at Black Hat then projected the password. So there are some real problems with the fact that we're all using the same software, absolutely. But I think it's too late to go back. Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea what the magnitude of investment in this country is into computer science R&D that's going to actually help us in this area?
Well, I can't give you a dollar figure for investment in IT security R&D, but I can tell you it's infinitesimal compared to what it needs to be. I was at the headquarters of a very large software company a couple of years ago and met with the vice president for R&D, and he had a very large budget. And I was impressed by that, and I said, what percentage of it is for cybersecurity? And I was not impressed by the answer, because it turns out that most of the R&D budget was for the Xbox. No, we're not investing anywhere near enough. And we're investing largely through venture capital companies in cybersecurity startups that come up with a commercial product that addresses one aspect of cybersecurity. And that frequently is good, because these startups frequently are at the cutting edge and coming up with new technologies and competing with the large firms that are already out there that sometimes get sleepy. But the fundamental basic research in such questions as, can we replace the internet? Can we have something other than the TCP packet switch system? Can we have something that is inherently secure? There's almost no money going into that. And so when you look out into the future and you say, well, maybe 20 years from now we'll have something that's more secure. Well, the only way you do that is by starting to invest in it now. And as your question suggests, the R&D budget for fundamental change in the nature of the cyber world isn't there. Nor, by the way, are we spending enough money as a country in cybersecurity education. You know, the Chinese are able to hack into all of our networks because they are turning out hundreds of thousands of cybersecurity trained people year after year. And our number is in the low thousands. And our requirement for trained people is huge. The number of cybersecurity jobs that go unfilled or go by filled, that are filled by people who are not qualified in this country, it's an enormous problem. And again, we're not going to solve the overall problem until we invest in R&D and education.
Yeah. Sir, so one of the problems that I've been having is that in my space community, and I've talked to as a keynote in several conferences to space developers, and they seem to think of this as still being sort of information assurance or a software problem, and they're not understanding the fact that people are now using the software as a vector into the control systems for their physical systems. When they get the message, they're horrified, and they feel even more helpless. So my question to you is basically, where do you tell people to start? How do we prioritize the risk? We can't do everything all at once. And you mentioned a little bit when you said crown jewels, so maybe you can pick up there.
I agree with you. You can't do everything all at once. But, you know, you say people get horrified when they realize the risk. What I see in my consulting with private companies is when companies get hacked, and the CEO and the CFO and the board get pulled in because the company has been hacked and it's a disaster, and maybe it's even a material risk that has to be reported to the SEC. When that happens, the CEO gets religion. And when that happens, they're willing to spend money on cybersecurity, and frequently they spend it in the wrong ways. And so what I try to tell these people is, begin by this discovery process. You can't defend everything. You have to prioritize your risk. And the discovery process is twofold. To discover what your crown jewels are, and that's not just by sitting around and asking, there's a process to figure that out. And then discover what your worst case scenarios are. And there's a process to figure that out. And if you can defend your crown jewels better, and if you can mitigate the risk of the worst case scenarios, that's all you can hope for. This is about risk mitigation. It's not about absolute prevention. One more question.
country that has actually the right approach to cybersecurity, one that can be emulated?
Is there anybody who's doing it right? I frequently get asked the question, what country is doing it right in terms of defense? And I think, unfortunately, the answer is places like China actually have an advantage over us in defense. They have an advantage because they don't worry about civil liberties and there's complete government control of the cyberspace. So that's not the solution for us. Are there sectors that are doing it well? There are parts of the financial services sector that are doing it well. But the bad news there is even those companies that are doing a really good job in the financial services sector get hit when a new kind of attack happens. So, no, there's no one who is doing it completely well. And that comes back to the last question, which is, this is about risk mitigation. It's not about complete prevention. So, the message, again, in case you didn't get it when I hit you over the head the first time, is you got a problem. You can't solve it completely. But the first step is admitting you have it. Thanks very much.